Hello everybody and welcome to this session on the Human Development Index that we're going to be building out within Power BI. So today we're going to be looking at something that's created by the United Nations Development Programme called the Human Development Index. So the Human Development Index, I'm just showing here on my screen, is a combination of kind of three different things. It combines three dimensions. One of those dimensions is looking at a long and healthy life. And that's measured by your life expectancy at birth. So if you're born today, how long are you expected to live? The second metric it brings up is knowledge, which is based on looking at schooling and mean years of schooling. And finally, the third measure that kind of makes up the Human Development Index is a decent standard of living, and that's based on gross national income per capita. And these three things are combined together to create what's known as the Human Development Index. And that's a score of between 0 and 1 for every country for every year. So, for instance, the United Kingdom will have a score for 1990 of between 0 and 1, and different score for 1991. So just to give you a bit of an indication about what this data looks like, I'm just going to have a first look at it in Excel. So here's the data that we're going to be working from, and I've downloaded this from the United Nations Development website. So what we've got here is we've got country in column A, and that's from just using the 3-digit country codes. So we're going to need to map those to actual country names because they're not a lot of use. So you might know that AFG is Afghanistan, but you'd have to know that, and really you want the detail. And then across each of the columns, we've got each of the individual years. And as you can see, there is a score of between 0 and 1 in each of these cells to represent each year for each country. We're going to need to clean this data up because Power BI isn't going to like data in this format. And we'll get to that when we look at the transforming data in them. So the second piece of data we've got, as I mentioned, we've got these 3-digit country codes. We need to be able to map those to each individual country, continent, and the country name. So we've got a way of mapping that as well. Great. So we're now going to pop to Power BI. That's everything you need to know for the session. So the first thing we're going to do within Power BI is we're going to enable the shape map visual. And this is a sort of a visual that's in preview with Microsoft. It's been in preview for a long time, but we're going to need that for our mapping later on. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to need to go to File, which is up here in the top left-hand corner. Once we go to File, we're going to go to Options and Settings, which is just here, and then Options. So Options and Settings, Options. And once we've gone there, we're just going to have this options piece up, and there's this preview features button here. And the one that you'll need to tick on is the shape map visual. So you just need to make sure you've got that ticked and then click OK. When you do that, your Power BI will ask you to restart. So you'll need to just do a quick restart of Power BI. Great. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my visualizations page here on the right hand side, just by clicking the arrow here. And with that open, I'm actually going to put a background to my page, which I can then work with, and I can put all my graphics in. So if you use the Format button here, and then Page Background, and then on Page Background, you can add an image, which you're going to need to change the transparency on because it defaults to 100%. You're going to need to change that to 0. Let's do that. So if we click Add an Image, and I've already created an image here, which is the Human Development Index background. As mentioned, I just need to drag that transparency down to 0%. And I just need to change the image fit. And I just want to put that to fit just here. And as you can see, I've now got a background through which I can now start to lay out my report. The background program I use to create my background is called Canva, which is canva.com. But you can use anything you like to create this, and I've just downloaded it as a PNG file download. So that's how I've created mine. But you can use PowerPoint or anything else that you like to use. I just like this piece of software. Okay, great. So now that we've got our background, we're now going to start to bring in our data. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to click on the Get Data tab, which is the way we always get our data in. And we're going to choose today to bring in our data from text CSV. And when I click on text CSV, I'm just going to make sure that my files are actually closed, so I'm just going to close them down. Close those down, and then I'm going to click on the Human Development Index file. So the first thing Power BI will do is it will give us this preview feature here, which we will then need to look at. Now you can choose just to load your data directly in. I don't think anybody ever does that. So you will be using this transform data, and this is going to take us into a separate screen, which is Power Query, which is also sort of prevalent within Excel if you've ever used that, and is also available within the cloud version as well, or within data flows. So here's our data, and the first thing hopefully that you'll notice is that we've got all our countries here across in the first row of data, and really they should be here in the columns. So we've got column names like column 1, column 2, column 3, not very useful at all. So we want to just push that row up one level so that that country then becomes in our column 1, and we do this using the use first row as headers button. And there you go, straight away you can see that's moved that row up. And the other thing we want to be able to do is we want to be able to have our country down one column, our year on another, and then the value for each year down one column. And the reason we want this is that if you had to create metrics, it's very difficult to create them for each individual column. It's much easier if you've got them all in one column. There's two different approaches that you can use to do this. You can select 1990 and you can scroll all the way across the end and highlight 2018. And then you can choose to unpivot these columns. And this is the opposite of pivoting that you do within Excel or anything like that. You can see now we've got our country, our year, which is called attribute, we'll need to deal with that, and the value. Okay, so not very useful. So it's very useful like that, but it's not very useful if an additional year gets added, because what happens is it creates additional columns here on the right hand side. Because as we add extra years, it's only trying to unpivot years 1990 to 2018. So instead of unpivot the columns, what you can do is you can select the country and you can choose to unpivot other columns, and that's just unpivoting everything that isn't country. And what that'll do when you click that is it will give you, oh, wrong one, apologies, let's go back to that. So right click, unpivot other columns. There you go, and now you've done exactly the same thing, but if you get 2019, 2020, 2021 added, it will automatically bring it through. Another just important observation here is it's adding that step here on the right hand side. So each time I click something, it's adding a step down here. So that's just something to bear in mind. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose to rename the attribute to year. And there we go, I've now got country, year, and value. And it's given me my various steps down here. So we've got 6 steps, the final one being rename columns. But actually there's a bit of a cleaner way to do this, because you want fewer steps here on the right hand side. You want that for sort of 2 main reasons. One is performance. So as you start doing bigger and bigger data, the cleaner and the fewer steps that you have, the more efficient your code will run. But also if you have to come back to something in 6 months' time, if it's 4 steps rather than 6, 7, 8 steps, it does make your life a lot easier to understand what it is you've actually done. So to tidy that up, we're going to do a few things. First of all, any changing of types, I'm just going to delete those, because changing of types is quite hungry. So we want to do it right at the end of the process. So I'm going to delete both of those steps. Promote steps, that's fine. Unpivot. Now I've got a rename columns here. I'm actually going to delete that rename columns. Instead of renaming, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust it here in the formula bar rather than actually creating a new step. And the way to do that, firstly, you need to enable the formula bar, which you do by clicking on View and then Formula Bar. So you can see I've already got it ticked, but by default it will be off. So just make sure you've got that enabled. And with that formula bar, you can see in my formula that we've got country, attribute, and value, which is the same as our 3 columns. And all we're going to do is rename them in the formula bar. So where it's attributes, I'm just going to rename that to year. Oh, rename that year. And where we've got value, I'm just going to change that to HDI, stand for. Great. Do that. Oh. Yeah, HDI. There we go. There we go. We've got 3 values. The next thing I'm going to do is we've actually got some nulls in our data. So here we go. We can see we've got some blanks in our data, and I just want to remove those nulls out of our data. So I'm just going to take those out. So if we go remove empty here, we can remove all the nulls. And then finally, I'm going to do my data type. So I'm going to change this to a whole number, and I'm going to change this to a decimal number. And I just click on these numbers here to do that and change them to the type I need. So now I've got country, year, and human development index all selected, and I've got sort of 5 nice clean steps. But I can go a bit further here to make this even cleaner. So the first thing I can do is I can remove any spaces in my steps. And that's because when we look at the raw code, it makes it a lot cleaner and easier to understand if you remove all of the spaces. And I'm just using underscores here. So click on the name, rename it, and just put an underscore in there, just so it's got it. So rename, there we go, and underscore. Great. And now when I go to the advanced editor button, which is on view, what I'll see is I will see each of those 5 steps broken out. So I've got the source, which is step 1, getting the data. And I can just put these comments here by hitting a backslash. So backslash. Step 2 is going to be promoting first row to headers. Step 3, columns. The 4th step is going to be filtering out the blanks. Then step 5 is going to be changing. Changing the type of data. And then here, after the in, you can see it's just returning step 4 in there, just so we've got that in as well. 4. Change step 5. There you go. I've just put in comments next to each step in terms of what it is actually doing. And when I click done here, what you'll notice is I get an eye here on the right hand side next to my information, and if I hover over it, it actually tells me a comment that I've put in place. So if I ever have to come back to this, or anybody else has to read my code, they can see exactly what each step is doing. So step 1, getting the data. Step 2, promoting the header. Step 3, I'm pivoting. And step 4, filtering out the blanks. It's a really useful way of keeping track of what you've done, and also just drives a bit of best practice. You can even write the comments first and then do your steps. So if you know the comments that you want to do, and you can kind of logically write it out, then you can do your steps. It just keeps everything cleaner and easier to do. So now that we've got that, I'm just going to hit close here. In fact, I'm going to do it this way, so I can go home and then close and apply. And that's just going to bring these changes through into the model. Great, so that's the changes all brought through. So the first thing we're going to do is just have a quick look at our data. So we've got 3 tabs here on the left-hand side. We've got the first one shows us the visualization, which is the one we're currently on. The second one shows us our table of our data, which looks like Excel. The third one we're going to deal with lastly, and that deals with relationships. If we just have a quick look at our data on the second tab, we can see we've got country, year, and human development index. So all looks good. Go back up to our first tab. I'm just going to drop in the country, and I'm just going to drag and drop that into the page, and it's automatically picked out the locations that it's needed. But for now, we're just going to look at it in a table view. So we'll start with a table, and then we'll sort of progress on to a map. So I just change any type over by clicking on the visualizations here and selecting the one I want. So in this case, I've just chosen table just there. Great. So now I've got a table. Actually, let's have a look at year in that table. And let's remove country. if we just drag in HDI, which gives us a Human Development Index, and straight away we've got a problem because the year that I've dragged in is returned a number here, and it's summing up all of the years. And what I can do to correct that is just using the down arrow here, and you can choose Don't Summarize, and that will give me each year here in one column and the HDI for that year in another. Hopefully, though, you've kind of all spotted the problem, and the HDI hasn't returned a score of between 0 and 1. And the reason for that is it's summing up all of the individual countries. And what we want to do is we want to take an average, and we're going to have to actually calculate that average. I'm just going to show you quickly how we can do that. So we do that, and we do that by writing something called DAX. And with DAX, we can do two things. We can create new columns in our data. So where we've got country, year, HDI, we could add another column, or we create new measures which sort of sum up or average or various other different calculations that you can do. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on New Measure here across the top. And that new measure that we're going to create is going to take we're going to call it the HDI score. And what we're going to do is we're going to use something called a divide function. And we're going to divide the HDI, Human Development Index score, by the rows of data that we've got in our model for that particular table. Just zoom in on that and just explain what that's doing. So what we're doing is we're saying that the Human Development Index, we want to sum up all of those Human Development Indexes, but we want to divide that by the number of rows. And because each country is on each row, we know that we'll get an average for each country. Do that. And it will also provide an average overall. So now I've got my HDI score here on the right hand side. I can just drag that into the values, and I've got a HDI score there for each year, which you can see. So now I know that's working. It's giving me a score between 0 and 1. And I can even sort of check that this is working correctly because I can drop my country onto the page, and I can pick, say if I pick Afghanistan, AFG, it's saying Afghanistan in 1990 has a score of 0.3. If I go to my data, I click filter, I select Afghanistan, and I select 1990. I've got a score of 0.3 or 0.298, just rounded up to 0.3. So that's the Human Development Index score that we've got, and I'm just going to change this now into a nice sort of chart for us to use. So I'm going to delete the HDI, which is just the implicit measure that Power BI was creating, and I'm going to click on the stack bar chart or the bar chart just to give me the columns down here on the side. And if I just drag that into here, and this is where the kind of having my background already set, I can just drag and drop it into place, and it kind of fits quite nicely in that space there, and you can kind of see what it is. Okay, so we now have a HDI score here, and I'm just going to unselect Afghanistan, so we've got all countries involved. And the first thing I'm going to do with this is we can see that we've got a sort of a change in based on the size of the bars, but we can also do this using the color of the bars using the conditional formatting. On the top here, we've got sort of a format pane. And if you click on that format pane and select data colors, what you can do, as well as the bars being determined by sort of length, we can also change the coloring using this FX. And if you haven't got the April release or later, this won't be here. You'll have to kind of hover and it'll give you a little FX button up here, but it's here now. So get the latest release, it's much easier. So when you click on that FX, what will happen is it'll bring up this formula bar, and you can then choose to base the color on a metric. And the one that we're going to use is the one that we've created, the Human Development Index score. And it's going to say the lower value, the lighter, and higher values, the darker blue. Do that, we'll see that our bar chart is now updated, sort of light to dark, where it's getting better. And we can see it's actually improving the Human Development Index through the years. It's actually, you know, quite a positive story here. You see it going up. Great, so that's our sort of bar chart. Is just sort of quite a simple score for the Human Development Index. But now what we want to do is we want to bring in our map. So we've got a picture of kind of all the different countries, and then we can filter the countries and we can see how they're sort of compare to the average over time. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to click and we're going to use this shape map visual that we brought in earlier using the preview features. And when we click on that shape map visual, you'll see we get a shape map here in on our workspace that we're going to be actually using. Okay, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to use location. And actually what we're going to do first is we're going to bring in our country mapping data in order to use this map a bit more effectively. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go back to our get data, and we're going to go to text CSV, and we're going to bring in that other file that I showed you right at the beginning, which is this countries to continent mapping. Great. Okay. So when we do that, it gives us all our data in preview as it did before. Again, we're going to go to transform data, not load it straight in. Okay, and when we go to transform data, what we can see is actually this has done a much better job with our data. Before we had headers on the first row. This time it's already done it for us, and actually you can see here Power BI has automatically detected and done the promoted headers for us, and it's nicely done the change of type of data as well for us. It's already in a good state. I mean, the only thing to bear in mind is that we do have some countries which are mapped to multiple continents, and that's going to cause us a problem a bit later on. So let's just bring that data in. So instead of clicking close and apply, this time I'm just going to hit the cross up here, and it does exactly the same thing. Hit cross here, apply changes. Yes, we do. So you can close it anyway, and it will still bring in the data. And just to prove that, we're going to go down to this modeling tab here on the left-hand side, and we can see we've now got two tables: our original Human Development Index with our original 3 columns in our one measure, and we've got our new table here as well, which is we're going to have to use. So what we're going to do is we're now going to create a relationship between this map, this table, which has got all our countries and continents in, versus our Human Development Index, which has only got our 3-digit country codes in. And we're going to do that by selecting country and just dragging and dropping it against the Human Development Index. But what you can see when that happens is Power BI actually complains about it. It goes, the relationship has a cardinality of many to many. And that's because of the problem that I showed you earlier, which is there are multiple instances of some countries in that data. So we need to remove that. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go transform data, which takes us back to our query editor that we were looking at earlier. We're going to select the countries to constant mapping table, and we're going to select the countries, and we're just going to remove any of the duplicates, and we just do that by remove rows, remove duplicates. Okay. Now we've only got one instance of each country in our table. You might want to be a bit more scientific about this. For instance, you might want to decide which when it's unclear which continent the country's in, you might want to pick it yourself rather than just clean it up this way. But it's just to sort of show you the issue with modeling that you have. So when you do the country to country mapping now, you can see it automatically just creates that relationship for me. I can double click on it, and you can see it's not complained this time at all. It's saying many to one, and it's saying the single direction travel. So it's very happy with that. So it's got no issues with modeling. So if we go back up to the visualizations pane, now is we're going to bring in our country into our location. Okay, and we've got another problem. When we bring in country into our location, we get a map of the United States. That is not very useful to us because we're looking at world data. So what we're going to have to do is we're just going to have to go to the formatting. And the very useful thing about this map is if you click on shape, you can select and add in your own map. So you can see at the moment it's got United States, but we can add in our own. So if we click on add map, I've already built one out here, which you can click on, and there you go. It's now bringing in a world map rather than each individual, just the state of the United States. Okay, so if we now pop back to our data, and we've just got country in there for location. We're not sort of specifying different colours at the moment. But what we want to do is we want to take our HDI score and drag it and let that determine the colour. There you go. You can see that some of these colours have changed. We've got some lighter colours here. We've also got some sort of darker colours up here. And we've also got some greys, which are going in. And the greys are signifying that we're missing data. So we haven't got any data up here for Greenland, for instance, for the Human Development Index. But obviously, you know, that is a sort of a nature of the data, but we need to kind of highlight that to the user. So now when I hover over, if I hover over a country such as the United Kingdom, for instance, I can see the Human Development Index score for it. Not very useful though, because it's still going to be just GBR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the full country name, I'm going to drop it into tooltips, and I'm going to take the full name of the continent as well. Great. And now when I hover over the UK, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the EU, in Europe, which I'm using the code, which isn't very useful. Let's use the name of the continent rather than the code. Just again, just dragging that into tooltips. And there's so much more you can do with tooltips, but that's for another session. Okay, so when I hover now, I've got United Kingdom, Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and I've got in Europe. There we go. And I've got the score of 0.87. And when I click on the UK, what you'll see is the chart that we created here on the left-hand side is now updated. If I hover over it, I've got the HDI score, which is 0.71, which is the average for 2018 across the entire globe. And I've got 0.92 highlighted, which is our UK. So we know that the UK is about 0.21 higher in 2018 than the average for the globe. The other thing I can do is I can click down here, for instance, and I can have a look at another one. So if we look at Papua New Guinea, what we see with Papua New Guinea is that the average, if we look at 2018, the average of the human development is still 0.71 for the globe. Obviously, that's not going to change, but Papua New Guinea is 0.54, so it's lower than the average, and that's just highlighted. And then finally, it works the other way. So if I click on the bar charts, I'm also getting an update on my colors here on the graph as well. So that's everything to do with the Human Development Index and how we build it out. If you've got any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.